She walked into my room without a single piece of clothing on her body. No warning, no knock, she just walked right in. And the most shocking part of it all? She had absolutely no idea why I was horrified. This is the story of the roommate I thought was perfect, until the moment she shattered every single boundary. I never imagined I'd have to explain to another adult. Let me take you back to where this nightmare began. My bank account had been silently screaming at me for months. Living alone in this city had stopped feeling like independence a long time ago. Now it just felt like slowly watching my savings disappear, week after week, while the rent bill sat on the counter like a personal insult. I didn't want a roommate, I needed one, and I needed one fast. So I did what any desperate person does. I posted listings online. I joined every roommate finding group I could track down. I wrote a description of my apartment that made it sound significantly better than it actually was. And then I held my breath and waited. What followed were two of the most genuinely strange weeks of my adult life. Came the guy who spent, and I am not exaggerating, a full 20 minutes explaining his action figure collection. 200 pieces. Every one of them cataloged. Every one of them, he informed me with absolute seriousness, requiring display space in the shared living room. I smiled politely. I told him I'd be in touch. I was never in touch. Then came the woman who showed up to the apartment viewing with 3 cats. 3, completely unannounced. They materialized from her bag like some kind of pre-planned ambush, meowing, climbing my furniture, making themselves at home before I'd even offered her a seat. When I gently mentioned the building's strict one-pet policy, she stared at me with the expression of someone who had just been told the most offensive thing they'd ever heard in their life. "They're my babies," she said quietly. I understood, truly I did. But my landlord would have had my head on a plate. After her came the college student, who seemed perfectly reasonable for about 5 minutes, right up until the moment he casually dropped the detail about his weekend parties. Nothing crazy, just 30, maybe 40 people, just a normal weekend thing, in a 2-bedroom apartment. By the end of those 2 weeks, I was seriously reconsidering a future of instant noodles and complete solitude. At least the noodles wouldn't ask me to rearrange the furniture. My friends kept telling me to stay patient. The right person would come along eventually. I was losing every last shred of faith in that idea. Then I got a message from someone named Riley. Short message, professional tone, clean profile. She was a freelance photographer who had just moved from Europe for work. No red flags. Solid references attached. And her profile photo showed someone who looked, impossibly, after everything I'd been through, completely normal. Not working very hard to appear normal. Normal. Just genuinely, effortlessly normal. We scheduled a time for her to come see the place. I cleaned that apartment like the lease itself depended on it. In a very real financial sense, it absolutely did. When the doorbell rang that Saturday afternoon, I took one slow breath and pulled open the door. Riley was everything the previous candidates had not been. She was calm, composed, and genuinely thoughtful. She moved through every room with real interest, admired the natural light in the bedrooms, said kind things about the kitchen, even made a warm comment about the slightly awkward bathroom layout that I had always been quietly embarrassed about. She didn't just tolerate the apartment's quirks. She seemed to actually like them. "This feels like home," she said and smiled. Those 4 words were the best thing I had heard in weeks. We sat down in the living room and talked for over an hour. She told me about her photography career, freelance work for magazines, local businesses, editorial shoots. She had grown up moving frequently across different countries, which explained the faint accent I couldn't quite place. She was easy to talk to in the way that rare people are, the kind who actually listen when you speak, rather than just waiting for their turn. I told her about myself in return. Graphic designer. I worked from home a few days a week. Quiet lifestyle. I liked having friends over occasionally, but nothing wild. I valued my sleep and my personal space deeply. She nodded along, being genuinely familiar with everything I was describing. "I'm exactly the same," she said. "I need my own space to decompress. Being around people all day on shoots can completely drain you." We covered all the practical details: bills, cleaning schedules, noise levels, having guests over. She had strong references from previous landlords. Her background check came back completely clean. Everything was falling into place so smoothly that I kept waiting for something to go wrong. Nothing did. We signed the roommate agreement the following week. I had learned from enough online horror stories to put absolutely everything in writing. Pays what, when, house rules. All of it in clear, specific language. Riley read through every line carefully and signed without a single complaint. "This is really thorough," she said, sounding genuinely pleased. "I appreciate that. Better to have everything clear from the beginning." Moving day was easier than I expected. Riley didn't own much. Photography equipment, clothes, and some minimal furniture. Everything was packed in neat labeled boxes. We spent the afternoon getting her settled, and by evening she was almost entirely unpacked. "Want to order pizza?" she offered. My treat, as a thank you for being so welcoming. That first night we sat in the living room eating pizza and watching some random show neither of us had seen before. It felt easy, natural, like we'd been sharing this space for months instead of hours. She told funny stories about difficult photography clients. I shared my own work disasters. We laughed easily. And I remember sitting there thinking, genuinely, quietly thinking, how lucky I had gotten. The first full week was, honestly, perfect. We had our routines, and they fit together naturally. Riley was usually out during the day on shoots, while I worked from home. We'd cross paths in the kitchen, making coffee, putting together a quick dinner, chat for a few minutes, then drift back to our own spaces. It was the ideal roommate situation. She was considerate about noise. She cleaned up after herself in the kitchen immediately, every single time. She even came home one day with extra groceries and offered to share them. "I accidentally bought too much," she said with a small shrug. I was fairly sure she hadn't accidentally bought anything. I was fairly sure she was just being kind. We settled into a comfortable rhythm. Friday nights became our unofficial time to unwind together. We'd watch a film, or just talk over dinner about how the week had gone. She introduced me to her favorite European cinema. I showed her classic comedies she'd somehow never seen. It was genuinely nice, having someone to share the space with who felt more like a real friend than just a person who paid half the rent. There were small things, looking back, that seemed a little unusual, but nothing that raised any real alarm. Riley would sometimes stand quite close during conversations in the kitchen. Not uncomfortably close, just slightly closer than most people tend to stand. I assumed it was a cultural habit. Different countries have very different ideas about personal space, and I had no reason to question it. She was also quite natural with casual physical contact. A hand on my shoulder as she walked past, sitting right next to me on the couch, even when the rest of it was completely empty. Again, I put it down to personality. Some people are simply more physically expressive. It didn't feel strange. It just felt like her. One evening, about 2 weeks in, I was in my room working on a project. I heard the bathroom door open down the hall. A few seconds later, Riley walked past my open bedroom doorway on her way to her room. She had just stepped out of the shower, wrapped in a towel, hair still damp. She caught my glance and waved cheerfully. "Hey, how's the project going?" I felt a split second of awkwardness. She seemed so completely unbothered that I convinced myself I was the strange one for even noticing. "Good," I said. "Almost done." She smiled and continued down the hall. That's the thing about hindsight. You look back and you can see the signs sitting there, lined up clearly. In the moment, they seem like nothing, just little quirks, personality details, the things that make someone interesting and individual rather than anything to be concerned about. She had mentioned once, casually while we were making dinner together, that she had grown up in what she called a very open household. I didn't ask her to elaborate. I assumed she meant open-minded. The kind of family that talked freely, that didn't keep secrets from their children, treated emotions as something to be discussed rather than buried. It sounded nice, actually. Another time, talking about past roommate experiences, she laughed and said her previous housemates in Europe had been like family. "We shared everything," she told me. "You really get to know people when you live that openly." I nodded along, picturing the kind of close-knit friendships that sometimes grow out of shared living. The kind where people become your chosen family. It sounded warm and genuine. Looking back now, I realize she was telling me exactly who she was, exactly how she understood shared living spaces. She was being completely honest with me. I just wasn't hearing what she was actually saying. I was translating her words through my own experience, my own cultural assumptions, my own definition of what open and sharing meant between people who lived together. We were speaking the same language. We were talking about completely different things, and I had absolutely no idea what was coming. No idea that my comfortable, seemingly perfect living situation was about to become the most confusing, most uncomfortable, and, eventually, most unexpected educational experience of my entire adult life. If someone had told me, 3 weeks into this arrangement, what was about to happen, I would have laughed. Not Riley. She was thoughtful, she was considerate, she was respectful. But life has a particular talent for surprising you at precisely the moment you've stopped watching for it. It had been one of those days. You know exactly the kind I mean. The kind where everything that can go wrong does. Completely, thoroughly, without mercy. That was my Friday. A client had spent 2 full weeks watching me pour everything I had into a project, every detail considered, every element refined, and then, with the casual ease of someone changing a television channel, decided they wanted to scrap the entire thing and start over from scratch. Different colors, different layout, different everything, new concept entirely. And they needed it by Monday. I spent the whole day hunched over my computer, rebuilding from zero. My eyes ached. My back had locked up from hours in the same position. My brain felt like it had been wrung out and left to dry. By the time evening came, I wasn't just tired. I was completely, thoroughly done with the world. All I wanted, the only thing I wanted, was to disappear into my room, pull up something mindless on my laptop, pretend the outside world had ceased to exist for the next several hours. Riley had texted earlier in the day saying she'd be out late. Some photography networking event downtown. She had sounded excited about it. Perfect, I thought. The apartment to myself. Exactly what I needed. I ordered takeout, ate quickly at the kitchen table, without really tasting any of it, and retreated to my bedroom. I changed into my most worn-in, comfortable clothes. The old t-shirt that had survived approximately 100 washes. The sweatpants with the hole in the knee that I absolutely refused to throw away, because some things are too comfortable to let go of. I climbed into bed, stacked up the pillows, opened my laptop, and found something light and silly to watch. For about 20 minutes, it worked. The tension in my shoulders started to loosen. My brain began to quiet down. The disaster of a day was fading into background noise. Then I heard the front door open. Riley was home earlier than she'd planned. I heard the familiar sounds of her moving through the apartment, refrigerator opening and closing, a cabinet, the soft sounds of someone winding down after a long evening out. Normal sounds, comfortable sounds, barely registered them. I went back to my show. Then my bedroom door opened. I want to pause here for just a moment and mention something important. I had never locked my bedroom door. Not once since Riley moved in. It had simply never felt necessary. She had always knocked before entering. Always. In the weeks we'd been living together, she had never once walked into my room without checking first. I had grown completely comfortable with that. I had stopped even thinking about it, which is exactly why what happened next hit me the way it did. The door swung open. Riley walked in. She was holding a glass of wine. She was smiling. The wide, easy smile of someone who had just had a genuinely good evening. And she was completely, entirely without clothing. Partially, not almost, completely. My brain stopped, not slowed down, not hesitated. Stopped. I blinked. Once, twice, 3 times. I genuinely wondered, for a fraction of a second, whether my exhausted eyes were constructing something that wasn't there. Whether the long, draining day had finally pushed me into some kind of waking hallucination. But no. This was real. This was actually happening. Riley walked across my room with the easy, unhurried confidence of someone who saw absolutely nothing unusual about the situation. She reached the side of my bed, sat down on the edge near my feet, right on top of the covers, took a slow sip of her wine, and exhaled contentedly. "What a night," she said, her voice warm and relaxed. "That networking event was so boring at first. Honestly, I almost left, but then I met this incredible wedding photographer who wants to collaborate. We talked for almost 2 hours. She's working on this amazing project about cultural wedding traditions around the world, and she wants me involved. She kept talking. She just kept talking, telling me about the people she'd met, the potential projects on the horizon, the conversations she'd had. Her voice was light and animated and completely at ease. Like this was normal. Like she was sitting at the kitchen table over morning coffee. Like she hadn't just walked into my bedroom, without knocking, in a state that no roommate had ever been in when entering my personal space. I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. My mouth had fallen open at some point, and no words were coming out. My entire body had gone completely still. The kind of stillness that happens when your brain is so overwhelmed by conflicting signals that it simply freezes everything and waits for instructions that aren't arriving. Riley didn't notice. Or if she did, she gave no sign of it. She shifted her position on the bed to get more comfortable, tucking one leg underneath her the way you do when you're settling in for a long, relaxed conversation with someone you're completely at ease with, and continued sharing details about her evening. Finally, after what felt like a very long time, something reconnected inside me. "Riley," I said. My voice came out strange, thin. It was Trav from somewhere far away. She looked at me, eyebrows raised, genuinely curious about the interruption. "What do you mean? Telling you about my evening. What's wrong? What's wrong?" I forced myself to keep my eyes focused on a fixed point on the wall directly behind. Head. You're not wearing any clothing," I managed. "At all." She glanced down at herself. Then she looked back at me, and she laughed. Not nervously, not in embarrassment. She laughed the way you laugh, when someone points out something so obvious and unremarkable that the observation itself is funny. "Oh, that," she said, completely unbothered. "Yeah, I never wear clothes at home if I can avoid it. It's so much more comfortable, especially after being in formal clothes all evening at an event like that. Don't you feel that way after a long day?" No. No. I did not feel that way. Not in the way she apparently did. "Riley," I said, keeping my voice as steady as I could manage. "This is my bedroom. You can't just walk in here like this. You need to, please, put some clothes on." The easy smile faded slightly. In its place came something I hadn't expected. Genuine confusion, not guilt, not embarrassment. Not the expression of someone who had done something they knew was wrong, and were now trying to manage the reaction. Real, sincere confusion. "Why?" she said. "We're roommates. We live together. What's the big deal? What's the big deal?" "The big deal," I said, pulling my blanket up instinctively, as if somehow that would help, "is that this is my private space, and you need to wear clothes. This isn't appropriate." She set her wine glass down on my nightstand. Something about that small, casual gesture made the whole situation feel even more surreal, like she was settling in, like she was preparing to stay right there and have this entire conversation exactly as she was, without any intention of moving. "I don't understand," she said, and her voice had shifted. There was something quieter in it now, something almost hurt. "In my family, in every place I've ever lived, nobody had these kinds of hang-ups about the human body. We're all human. We all have bodies. It's not a big deal. It's never been a big deal." I kept my eyes fixed on the wall behind her. "Because that's just how it is here. You knock before entering someone's bedroom. You wear clothes in shared spaces. These are basic. These are just the rules." "I don't think of your bedroom as separate," she said. She genuinely sounded like trying to explain something I was failing to grasp rather than defending something she knew was wrong. "When you live with someone, you share space. All of it. That's what makes it a home, instead of just a building where two strangers happen to sleep in separate rooms." My exhaustion from the day had been replaced by a completely different kind of tired, the kind that comes from a conversation that makes no logical sense, where you feel certain you are both speaking the same language and equally certain that not a single word is landing the way it should. "Riley, I need you to leave my room right now, please, and I need you to put clothes on." She stood slowly. The confused, hurt expression deepened. "I just wanted to share my evening with you," she said quietly. "I thought we were friends. I thought we were close." "We are," I said quickly. "But that doesn't mean, just please, not like this." She picked up her wine glass and walked toward the door. At the threshold, she paused and turned back. "You know," she said, voice carrying the calm certainty of someone stating a fact. You're very tense. This kind of thinking, these kinds of rigid rules about the human body, this is exactly what causes people so much unnecessary stress. I grew up, people are so much more free about these things, so much more relaxed. Maybe, she added, you should think about why this bothers you so much. And then she left. The door clicked shut behind her. I sat completely still in my bed, staring at the closed door, wondering distantly if I had somehow imagined the entire thing. Then I noticed the small ring of condensation her wine glass had left on my nightstand. Physical proof that had actually just happened. I picked up my phone, opened my messages, found my best friend's contact. You are not going to believe what just happened, I typed, fingers moving faster than my thoughts. I wrote out the whole story, every detail. The response came back in under 30 seconds. Are you okay? That is not normal. That is really not okay. But was it Riley had seemed so completely genuinely confused by my reaction, so hurt when I asked her to leave, so sincere certain that I was the one viewing the situation incorrectly. Was I being unreasonable? Was this truly a cultural difference so significant that I simply couldn't see it clearly from where I was standing? Had I overreacted to something that, from a different perspective, was entirely innocent? I lay awake until 3 in the morning, staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment, the easy way she had walked in, the casual way she had sat down, the complete and total absence of any awareness that something had gone wrong. The worst part, worse than the shock, worse than the confusion, was the guilt. I felt guilty, like maybe I had hurt her feelings over something that carried no weight for her at all. Like maybe I was the rigid one, the closed-minded one, the one who needed to examine his own discomfort rather than direct it outward. Underneath that guilt, something else held its ground. The quiet, steady knowledge that my discomfort was real, that my feelings were valid, that regardless of her intentions, regardless of how completely innocent her perspective was, walking into someone's private space without warning, in that state, was not something you simply did without a conversation first. Good intentions don't override the impact. As the city outside my window was beginning to get quiet, exhausted, confused, and with no idea at all how to face the morning, I woke up feeling like I hadn't slept at all. My eyes were heavy, my mind was foggy. My body felt like it was still carrying the weight of everything from the night before. The exhausting workday, the shock, the hours of lying awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying a conversation that still didn't make complete sense no matter how many times I turned it over in my head. For one brief, merciful moment after opening my eyes, I thought maybe it had been a dream. Then I noticed my bedroom door, locked, from the inside. Something I had never done before. Not once in all the weeks since Riley had moved in. I hadn't even thought about it consciously. My hands had done it, automatically sometime in the night, while the rest of me was still trying to process what had happened. That small, locked door told me everything I needed to know. It had not been a dream. I stayed in bed longer than usual, scrolling through my phone, without really absorbing anything on the screen. Through the wall, I could hear Riley moving through the apartment, the coffee maker starting up, cabinet doors opening and closing, the ordinary, predictable sounds of a normal morning. Sounds that had always felt comfortable and familiar before, but now felt strangely loaded. Like every small noise carried a question I didn't know how to answer. Eventually, I accepted the obvious truth. I couldn't stay in my room forever. I needed coffee. I needed to eat something. And I needed to face whatever version of reality waited for me on the other side of that door. I took a slow breath, unlocked the door, and stepped out into the hallway. Riley was in the kitchen, fully dressed, jeans, a sweater, standing at the stove. The smell of eggs and toast drifted through the apartment. When she heard my footsteps, she turned and looked at me and gave me a smile. Not her usual smile, not the wide, easy, completely unguarded expression I had grown used to seeing from her. This one was smaller, careful, the smile of someone who was aware that the ground between them and another person had shifted overnight and wasn't yet sure how solid it was. "Morning," she said softly. "I made extra if you want some." "Thanks," I replied. My voice came out more formal than I intended. "I appreciate it." We moved around the kitchen with the careful, Deliberate politeness of two people trying very hard not to collide, physically or otherwise. She poured coffee. I got a plate. We avoided looking directly at each other for slightly too long at a time. Usually our mornings were easy. Conversation came naturally over breakfast. Small talk about plans for the day. Something funny one of us had read. Whatever was on our minds. Kitchen had always been the most comfortable shared space in the apartment. Now the air in it felt thick, pressurized with everything neither of us had said yet. I sat down at the kitchen table. After a moment, Riley sat down across from me. We ate in silence. The only sounds were cutlery against plates and the occasional quiet sip of coffee. It was the most uncomfortable meal I had eaten in recent memory. Then Riley set down her fork. She looked at me directly, not aggressively, steadily, like someone who had spent the night arriving at a decision and was now committed to it. "We need to talk about last night," she said. "Yeah," I said. "We do." She wrapped both hands around her coffee mug, a small grounding gesture. "I've been thinking about it since I went to bed. I didn't sleep much either." She paused. "I want to explain where I was coming from. I also genuinely want to understand why you reacted the way you did. I'm not saying that to be dismissive. I mean it. That was more than I had expected. More reasonable, more open. I felt some of the tightness in my chest loosen slightly. "Okay," I said. "You first." Riley looked down at her coffee for a moment, then back up. "I grew up in a community in Northern Europe," she began. "It wasn't exactly a commune. It was close. Multiple families living together, sharing resources, raising children collectively. Private space wasn't really a concept. Bedroom doors didn't have locks. People moved through the shared space however they were comfortable. Bodies were just bodies. Not something to be hidden or ashamed of. Not something loaded with meaning." I listened without interrupting. "When I was growing up," she continued, her voice becoming more animated as she found her way into the explanation. "Adults and children would use the sauna together as a completely normal thing. Swimming without extra layers was normal. Changing in front of each other was normal. The entire idea that there was something wrong or inappropriate about the human body in its natural state, that concept genuinely did not exist in the environment I grew up in." She looked at me carefully. "When I moved around for work, living with other photographers, artists, creative people in different countries, it was the same kind of environment. Open, relaxed. We wore what we wanted. Nobody made rules about it. Some of my closest friendships in my life formed in those spaces because we could be completely ourselves with each other. No walls. No pretending." I could see as she spoke that this wasn't an excuse she had constructed overnight to justify herself. This was simply how she understood the world. How she had always understood it. The framework she operated inside without ever having had reason to question it. "So last night," she said quietly, "when I came home feeling happy and wanting to share my evening with you, it genuinely truly did not occur to me that it would be a problem. In my mind, we were roommates. We were friends. We shared a home. I wanted to connect with you about my day the same way I would have with any of the people I'd lived with before." She paused. "But I could see on your face that something was very wrong, and I've been trying to understand why ever since." She looked at me with an expression that was completely open. No defensiveness, no performance. "Help me understand your side." I had spent half the night trying to organize my thoughts into something coherent, and they still felt tangled. But I tried. "I grew up in a completely different environment," I started. "In my family, privacy was one of the most important values we had. Closed doors meant don't enter without knocking, and that applied to everyone, including immediate family members. Getting dressed, getting ready, anything involving your body. That was something you did privately, alone, behind a closed door. Even between people who loved each other completely, clear boundaries around personal space." Riley nodded slowly, listening. "My bedroom has always been my sanctuary," I continued. "The one space in the world that is entirely mine. When someone enters that space, especially without asking, it already feels like a violation of something important. A line being crossed that I didn't give permission to cross." I stopped, trying to find the most honest words. "It's not that I believe the human body is something shameful or wrong. It's that in my experience, in my cultural understanding, Being without clothing around another person implies a level of closeness and intimacy that exists in very specific relationships and very specific contexts. When that context doesn't match the situation, when there's no shared understanding that this is acceptable between the two people involved, it feels deeply uncomfortable, alarming even. Riley was quiet for a moment. But those are arbitrary rules, she said, not aggressively, simply, matter-of-factly. The way you'd point out that a mathematical formula had been applied incorrectly. They're cultural constructs. They're not universal truths. They're just what one particular group of people decided was normal. Maybe, I said, but they're my rules. They're what allow me to feel safe and comfortable in my own home. And regardless of where they come from, regardless of whether another culture sees them differently, they are valid. For me, they are completely valid. We sat with that for a moment. The silence between us felt different from the one over breakfast, less heavy, like something had been released into the air that had been trapped inside both of us since the night before. Riley exhaled slowly. I can see that, she said. I genuinely can. I don't want you to feel uncomfortable in your own home. That is the last thing I want. She rubbed the side of her forehead thoughtfully. But I also feel like what you're asking me is to change something that's been a fundamental part of how I live for my entire life. Something I don't experience as strange or wrong at all. I'm not asking you to change who you are in your own private space, I said carefully. Your bedroom is yours. What you do in there is your business entirely. But my bedroom is mine, and in the spaces we share, there need to be ground rules that we both actually agree on. Not just one person operating by their own standards and expecting the other person to simply adjust. So you want me to wear clothes whenever I'm outside my bedroom? Yes, I said clearly. And I need you to knock before entering my room and wait for a response before opening the door. Every single time, even if the door is open, that space is mine. Riley bit her lip, thinking. Then she offered something I hadn't expected. What if we compromise? I'll knock before entering your room, properly, and wait. And in the shared spaces, I'll always have something on. Not necessarily a full outfit at all times, but something, a robe, a t-shirt and shorts. Something that's actually clothing, not nothing. I considered it. It wasn't everything I would have wanted, but she was making a genuine effort to meet me somewhere in the middle. I could see that. As long as it's actual clothing, I said. And if I have guests over, full, normal clothes. Agreed, she said. Something in the room shifted. Not fixed, not by a long distance, but less broken than it had been 10 minutes ago. Like we had found the first loose brick in the wall between us and carefully set it aside. Then, Riley added something that sent my stomach sinking straight back down. I'll respect your boundaries because we live together, and I don't want ongoing tension between us, she said. But I want to be honest. I still think these hang-ups come from somewhere. I think you've been taught to be uncomfortable with things that are completely natural, and I think that's genuinely sad. There it was. The agreement wrapped around a quiet judgment. She wasn't respecting my boundaries because she understood them. She was tolerating them because she had decided they were a personal limitation of mine that she was generously choosing to work around. Riley, I said, and I kept my voice steady with some effort. This isn't about repression. This isn't about being taught to feel shame about anything. This is about consent. This is about the basic principle that you do not get to decide what makes another person comfortable in their own private space. Her jaw tightened slightly. And you, she said, don't get to decide that your cultural norms carry more weight or more validity than mine. The air in the kitchen changed. We had been building something, slowly, carefully, and now I could feel it beginning to crack. I'm not saying my way is more valid, I said, forcing myself to stay measured. I'm saying that when two people share a living space, the standard cannot be whatever makes one person comfortable while the other person quietly suffers. It has to be a middle ground that genuinely respects both people. But that is exactly what you're doing, Riley said, and her voice had sharpened. You're imposing your cultural standards on me and calling it boundaries. You're asking me to live by your rules inside a home I also pay for. Because we are in my country, I said, and I heard my own voice rise despite my best effort. Because this is my home too, and I was here first. Because basic respect for the person you live with means not making them deeply uncomfortable in the one place where they're supposed to feel completely safe. Riley stood up abruptly. Her chair scraped against the floor, sharp and sudden in the quiet kitchen. "This is exactly why I left Europe," she said. "To get away from people telling me how to exist. I thought here I would have more freedom. More room to just be myself." "This has nothing to do with freedom," I said. It is about judgment," she cut in. "You are judging me. You are standing there, judging me for being comfortable with things that you were taught to see as problems. You are making me feel like I have done something deeply wrong when all I did was be myself." "And you," I said, and the words came out before I could measure them, "are completely dismissing my feelings. You're acting like I'm the problem, like my discomfort is a character flaw, instead of a completely reasonable response." We stood there on opposite sides of the kitchen table, both of us breathing harder than the conversation should have required. The breakfast we had made together sat forgotten between us, long since gone cold. Riley picked up her coffee mug and walked toward her bedroom without another word. At the doorway she stopped, turned back, one last time. "I'll knock before entering your room," she said, her voice flat and controlled now. "I'll wear clothes in the shared spaces when you're around." A pause. "But don't ask me to pretend I agree with your hang-ups, because I don't." She disappeared into her room, the door closed behind her. Not a slam, but close enough. I stood alone in the kitchen, surrounded by the wreckage of a conversation that had started with so much genuine goodwill on both sides, and had still somehow ended up here. I had tried to listen. She had tried to explain. We had both attempted, in our own ways, to build something workable out of the gap between us. We had still walked away from the table further apart than when we sat down. The worst part was that I could see her point. I genuinely could. Cultural differences were real. Deep, lived, fundamental differences in how two people understood the world. Those were real. They weren't excuses. They weren't performances. But my feelings were just as real. And standing in that quiet kitchen, washing the breakfast dishes, neither of us had finished. I had the slow, sinking realization that an agreement on paper and a genuine understanding between two people were very different things. We had the first one. I wasn't sure we would ever have the second. The argument ended. But the tension didn't. If anything, the silence that followed was worse than the argument itself. Because at least during the argument, we were still talking. Still trying. Still facing each other across the same table, with some version of the intention to work things out. The silence meant we had stopped trying. We had become those roommates. You know exactly the type. The ones people warn you about when you first start looking for someone to share a space with. The ones who leave carefully worded notes on the refrigerator, instead of having conversations. The ones who memorize each other's schedules, not out of consideration, but out of a calculated need to avoid crossing paths. The ones whose entire domestic existence becomes a quiet, exhausting exercise in not having to acknowledge each other. That was us now. And the most painful part was how fast it had happened. 3 weeks ago, we had been sitting in this same apartment, laughing over pizza and old films, building something that genuinely felt like friendship. Now we were timing our trips to the kitchen like military operations, and the sound of the other person's door opening was enough to make both of us pause and recalculate our movements. Riley kept her word, technically. She knocked before entering my room. Every time, without fail. But there was something in the way she did it. A particular rhythm to those knocks. Communicated everything she wasn't saying out loud. 2 sharp, deliberate raps. Then exactly 1 second of waiting. Barely enough time to register the sound before the handle turned. Not enough time to respond. It was compliance delivered with the precise, unmistakable energy of someone who wanted you to know they found the requirement absurd. Every knock said, "I'm doing this because you're making me, not because I think it's necessary." In the shared spaces, she wore clothes. Technically, she had clearly decided that if she was going to follow the letter of our agreement, she would interpret that letter as narrowly as possible. A workout top and shorts that left very little to imagination. An oversized shirt with nothing underneath, and a neckline that slipped constantly off. Shoulder. A loosely tied robe that shifted with every movement. Nothing that violated what we had agreed to, strictly speaking. Everything chosen with the deliberate, quiet precision of someone who wanted you to feel the protest in every outfit. It was passive resistance, and it was exhausting to live alongside. I responded the only way I knew how. I retreated. I moved my work setup from the kitchen table, where I had always loved working, with the morning light coming through the window, back to my bedroom. I started eating all my meals alone in my room, ordering delivery instead of cooking just to avoid the possibility of an accidental overlap in the kitchen. Stopped using the living room entirely unless I was certain she was out. My apartment, the apartment I had lived in, shaped to my preferences, paid for month after month, began to feel like a place I was visiting rather than a place I lived. I was a guest in my own home, and yet you cannot avoid someone forever when you share four walls and a front door. We kept colliding, unavoidably, unpredictably, passing each other in the narrow hallway, reaching for the coffee maker at the same moment in the early morning, coming through the front door within minutes of each other after separate evenings out. Every encounter followed the same script. Hey, hey, and then nothing. No follow-up, no transition into conversation, just that single exchanged word hanging in the air between us like the last remnant of something that used to exist, and then the sound of one of us continuing down the hallway, and a door closing quietly behind them. The easy conversations were gone. The Friday night films were gone. The shared dinners and the funny stories about difficult clients and the comfortable, unforced rhythm of two people genuinely enjoying each other's company. All of it was gone, replaced by this hollow, careful performance of coexistence that fooled neither of us for a single moment. I noticed it affecting everything outside the apartment too. My work, which had already been suffering since the disastrous client project that had started this whole week, got worse. When you cannot genuinely relax in your own home, when the place where you are supposed to recover and restore yourself has become another source of stress, it follows you everywhere. I missed a deadline for the first time in 2 years. Project I delivered felt flat and uninspired even as I was sending it. A client I genuinely respected sent me a careful, concerned email asking if everything was all right because the work didn't feel like me. I didn't know how to answer that email honestly. Friends noticed too. When I met a group of them for dinner one evening, my best friend took one look at my face across the table and didn't even bother with small talk. "You look terrible," she said, not unkindly, just directly. "Thank you," I said. "Is it still bad with Riley?" I nodded, picked up my fork, put it down again without using it. "I hate being in my own apartment," I said. And hearing myself say it out loud, hearing those words come out of my own mouth about my own home, hit harder than I expected. I had to stop for a moment. I hate that feeling. This whole arrangement was supposed to make my life easier. It's made everything harder. Have you two talked again since that first morning? Not really. We're avoiding each other. Both of us. We've both chosen avoidance over resolution, and now we're just stuck in it. I pushed food around my plate without eating any of it. The thing that makes it worse is that I can see she's unhappy too. I see it on her face every time we pass in the hallway. Neither of us is getting what we want from this situation. Neither of us is winning anything. "Then you need to talk to her again," my friend said, gently but firmly. "Not to relitigate the whole argument, just to find a way to actually live together until the lease ends. This isn't sustainable, and you know it." She was right. I knew she was right. I just didn't know what was left to say.